that. But I mean, if you can pick up the speaker from the sound from the PA, you should be fine.
You should be able to hear, but it won't be close.
Yeah, it's fine.
Unless he just swaps. As soon as he's done with introduction, just...
No, I think just put it on them.
Can I just pop this on you?
What is that?
A mic.
Okay, so is it different to that?
Yes, definitely.
Do I need to hold both?
No, this will go on to you.
Oh. So you mean I don't need to use the other thing? Is that going to move? Because that moves? Is it going to be a problem?
Yes, I...
Huh? Will it, is that okay? All right. So I don't use that?
No, you will.
Oh, I do. I use both.
For online.
It's for?
For the online viewers only.
Ah.
Are you going with the lapel?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
No, you're still going to use...
Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to put that thing over.
No.
I don't need a mic anymore.
This is the mic.
Okay, that's great. So,
And then you're still going to use your hand.
No, we don't want to do that. We want to have I don't like the idea of using... You get the lapel for the computer. Put it.
We can keep this. Keep it in the jacket.
Okay, on.
Perfect. Comfortable?
Brilliant, yeah.
Comfortable? Good.
Have we done this before? It is funny, you know, it's, you know, how it's sort of, over the years, I'm just sort of saying that how it becomes a friendship, you know, through all the workings together.
Okay.
And we sit down and we can just chat about anything, and we had so many things to try and track in terms of history.
I see Kim Sachs is there.
No, I got your phone and I told her to come. Naughty Kim, who's adopted my cat.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, look, it's
No, I don't think I've done talks at the gallery at Everard Green, but not with my, well, maybe with my clothes. I'm trying to
This is quite
remember.
big.
Yeah, it's quite a big.
This
and
is
you see,
really
I
a
don't know
celebration
everyone.
for you.
Thank you. Thank
It
you
really
so
is,
much.
because, you know,
So, I mean, this whole trip has been unexpected. I didn't know I was going to be making 4 big sculptures. I've only finished the one. I thought I was going to be doing the little things I'd posted and only arrived last week. I thought they're going to be here before. Yeah.
is there somebody behind?
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. It's welcome to everybody. Thank you all for coming on a chilly Tuesday night. Hello. I think maybe for us it's a real opportunity to say welcome back to the home soil. We know you live in another part of the world, but for us just to have a little bit of catering with you is very special. So thank you, Deborah, for being here. I thank you for both talking. I think it's a privilege for us to always have conversations around art. So I look forward to it. But for everyone else, thank you so much for coming. This time last week we had a bit of a knee-knocking moment, so it's very nice to have a week later have some friends around. So thank you for being here. Thank you for obviously all wanting to come and hear Deborah, and I think it's amazing to be able to have those conversations. So thank you, and I hope you've got season 1.
Welcome everybody. It is my privilege to introduce Deborah and David. I first met Deborah on an exhibition at Krut Gallery in 1988, and I absolutely fell in love with this work. It's called The Passion. It was sort of a wedding anniversary gift. Her first year it's supposed to be paper, and it was an art on paper. So it's still one of our treasured possessions. And then another absolute highlight for me, not only because of Debbie's work, but in general was this, the Ubu 101 at the old Gertrude Posel Gallery in Senate House in Wits, 1997, curated by Fiona Rankin-Smith. And you can see there the covers of the 2 catalogues that are very rare, so if you do get them, treasure them, they are impossible to get hold of. It was one of the collaborations between Deborah and Robert Hutchinson, of course, William Kentridge, working on the theme of Ubu. We were also very privileged to see work by such illustrious artists as I indicated there on the right, I think the main one is Marcel Duchamp, of course, in Johannesburg. It was a truly magnificent exhibition. And there you have the young ones, working with Nelson Christian. On the left, you have Robert and a young William and a young Deborah there. And the last highlight was in 2004 when David published the taxi book series on Deborah. I had the privilege to review it for Bild newspaper. It was written by Deborah Stein. She taught me at this, and after which she grabbed me by the collar and said, "Well, Alan, why did you write?" And I said, "Oh, I thought you wouldn't understand the Afrikaans." And she said to me, "Of course I can read Afrikaans, I'm a South African." So Deborah, very welcome. It's a great privilege to have you here. Now, David, I met in 1981. He and Natalie Line teamed up with Natalie's gallery in Linksfield, and they are the two of them, sell, as we say in Linksfield, and they were working on a beautiful exhibition that's the cover of the catalogue of the David Hockney exhibition that they put together. They were also the first ones to exhibit Boshoff's work, and working on with Prince Joe Tilson there, and there you see Joe Tilson, Natalie, and David on the right. Now, very recently, David published this catalogue on Deborah's work in 2018, and he, I don't expect you to read that. So he drew up a fantastic timeline of the collaboration with Deborah Bell. You will remember that David partnered with Natalie Klein for a good 8 years. Natalie then went her way, and David decided to specialize in print publishing. And I think this is the beginning of the collaboration. Okay. Do we have the next slide? There we are.
Okay. Well, forgive me if things go wrong. Whenever I touch any machine, it always breaks down, even the remote. But I hope everybody can hear me, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you. And it's a celebration for Deborah, and I think, Deborah, you can see how many people in all of you have your work, love what you are, what you're about. And this rare opportunity arose for Deborah to come back and do some work on bronzes, which she can explain maybe a bit more about with Everard Reed Gallery. And it also made me look at our archive of the works we have of Deborah. And there have been 3 publications and numerous printers who've collaborated with her. So there's so much history. And one of the things about being a publisher is you really are providing information and history. And it's authoritative because it's coming directly from an interaction with the artist. It was why the taxi art books were so appealing, because it was people could read the artist's words and all that. It was really making it much more successful. And that was quite unexpected, but as was really my involvement with artists in South Africa. But to go back, that goes back to 81, when I published an edition of the British pop artist called Joe Tilson. And that was the beginning of publishing. But where that was great, there was a man called Jack Sheriff, 107 Workshop, who was quite extraordinary. I mean, he broke all the rules. And he was very much a mentor. And I could invite artists from different parts of the world to come and work with this exceptional master printer who had a workshop. And then one of them was Deborah. And that came about because I started inviting William Kentridge in 1993 to work with Jack Sheriff, and he was able to do these very large works. You saw the photograph of the 3 of them with Malcolm Christian, who had a workshop down in Caversham, and they would go down, but the size of what you could do was quite restricted compared to what you could do with Jack. Yeah. And William had done a very big plate called Casper's Full of Love, which some of you may know. And he was brave enough to be trying to edition it himself. But he, having worked with Jack, he decided he would send this huge plate, copper plate. And it so worked out that Deborah had been working at Artist Proof Studio on plates called Diary. I think there were 2 plates. And we can't quite work out how it happened, but those 2 plates went out with William's plate and ended up at 107 Workshop. And that was the beginning of our publishing our relationship. So maybe, I'm not quite sure where's a good place to start in terms of, but maybe when Robert Hodgins had this influence you, or encouraged you to be a printmaker, maybe you want to just touch on that. Or maybe that's not the case, but if you can explain.
Can you hear me? Is this working?
No, I think.
Oh, I thought someone had switched this on.
You turned on?
Is it? Okay. I'm not used to this, as you can see. Okay. Robert was my mentor and my lecturer at university. And, you know, when I did my master's, he was my supervisor for part of it. And he had been invited to make a series of print. And he was looking at Hogarth, because he said, Hogarth made Hogarth, Hockney made Hogarth, now Hodgins is going to make Hogarth. And he called it Ho, Ho, Ho. But then he approached William, and he was asked to have a 3rd artist, and they invited me to do it with them, which was wonderful. And we went down to Caversham, and it was one of those amazing experiences. We would work all day together, kind of sort of stealing little bits from each other's works, and then drink whiskey and dance and kind of cook together, and it was a very, very special time. So much so that we decided to do some more collaborations. So after the Hogarth series, we did a series called Little Morals, which was based loosely on looking at Goya. And then we went and did Ubu, which was also Robert's thing. He'd been making paintings on Ubu. And, you know, William then took Ubu and did Ubu in the Truth Commission and went on with that. And I decided to do Ubu in Africa. And my Ubu was more like an Idi Amin. My Ubu was Idi. So I hadn't really thought I was going to be a printmaker, even though I'd studied it at university. But I loved working on the metal plates, and I preferred doing dry point than etching. And those who don't know the difference is that dry point you scrape and gouge directly into the metal plate, whereas etching you put on an acid resist surface like a wax or something, and you draw through the wax and let the acid eat away into the lines. And I hadn't started making sculpture yet, but I realized after working at the foundry all this morning, I don't know if Carla's still here, but I was gouging away into plaster of Paris this afternoon on making sculpture. So I think my dry point ties into being a sculptor as well. I don't know if you feel that.
Well, I've always felt that sculptors have to be great draftspeople, because they're creating something 3-dimensionally, and you have to be able to draw to be able to achieve sculpture, especially yours are so complex. And so I think that was what was so appealing, because I think I always put my neck out and said you can't be an artist if you can't draw, which made life quite easy for us, because people who would approach me who were video artists or performance artists or painters who couldn't draw, I could say, well, you know, can't really help you because you have to come and work on a piece of copper and you have to make marks. But the works we sort of talking about at the moment predate what we have here. They're still, we don't have them in the archive. But an interesting place to start was how I became involved in assisting artists with printmaking in South Africa. It was never quite intended. I did a CD-ROM on William Kentridge in '97 because I was talking so much about his work and about South Africa. But by the artists coming to Jack, as you did, you came, those 2 plates of yours arrived, and of course you came to Jack Sheriff, and then you had these huge plates, and you could suddenly start using different sheen papers, Chinese papers. You could colour things, and you had a glorious time working with Jack, making these big works. And can you recall those days? I always remember these washing lines of papers which had been dyed to meet your required colours.
I mean, I'm just looking at, is it working again? Yeah. Is it working? Okay. I was looking at William's sleeper that's down in that room, and William made that a Jack. And before I went to Jack, I knew William had made that piece of Jack. So I decided the first work, apart from finishing the diary prints, which I did at Jack, I said to Jack, put on a soft ground, I'm going to lie in it and see what happens. And I decided it was going to be a plate about healing for me. And we don't have that image on the show, but I made the heel hold holy, which is in the shadow of the line, because my body print, I could see a line in it, a line in the sky. And I mean, that was just having heard William telling me about how he had made the sleeper print. So it was very, it was great to have a big plate and people who could do those things, and having had the idea of doing it from William. Of course, it looks completely different to anything William did, but that's fine.
But I think it would have been quite a quantum leap to work so big. But I think having gone there, I invited you to come back again. And then you did a series of the red line. And you may want to talk about that wonderful sort of synchronicity of that moment.
Yeah, I mean, lines appear everywhere in my work, but I'd been reading a novel called The Red Line on the Plane going across, and I was also about to have an exhibition in London, and I think we met about 3 weeks beforehand, and you drove me up to Jack's, and as I walk into the studio, there's a big pink a woodcut of a red line above the door. And I think, oh, that's interesting. I'm reading a book called The Red Line. And then Jack says to me, oh, we can't put you up in the hotel next door. It's full. We're going to put you up in the pub in the near village. He said it's called The Red Line. So, of course, by then I'm like really excited. And I did a number of prints called Red Line. And while I was there, it was sort of, because the book on The Red Line is an alchemical book about transformation. And then I went to my exhibition in London, and half my drawings had red lines in them, which I didn't remember having made. So, I mean, if you know my work, you know that I dip in and out of the mystic. So I was very excited about all of that.
So that's earlier work, which then it's not on show, or not even on our website. But we moved to the first image, and this was also one of those fortuitous things. I've moved around a lot. As a publisher, I spent most of my time learning about American artists. What happened in the 80s, one wanted to be a publisher of contemporary artists, and I was based in London, but British people didn't need prints on their wall because they had so many handed down with horses jumping over hedges and portraits and things like that. So the idea of promoting contemporary art was really America, where there was this emergence and accessibility of pop artists, especially Andy Warhol. And so it was a lot that came from that sort of thing. I'm not quite sure why I'm rambling. Oh, yeah. So amongst the various publishers I used to work with, there was a wonderful guy called Bob Feldman, and he used to commission David Hockney's etcher, a guy called Morris Payne, to do very big works. And I was visiting Bob, and Morris Payne was there, and he was having a down time. And so I said, well, look, why don't you come to South Africa? I don't have a press, but I'll arrange for you to come and teach South African artists a particular process called sugar lift. Sugar lift was a process that Picasso had learnt or invented, where there was an ability to make a direct mark, and Picasso had taught that to a printer called Aldo Cromelanc, and Hockney had learnt that from Aldo Cromelanc, and then Morris Payne had learnt that from Hockney. So I brought him to South Africa to teach various artists learn about it. And I suppose you and William learnt about Sugar Lift from Morris. So these were a series, and he came and he worked at Artist Proof Studios, because I didn't have a workshop, and you were one of the invited artists, and I don't know if you recall the detail, but I think he made 3 plates and you combined them. Do you have a recollection of this particular work in any detail?
Not directly. I mean, it's one of 3 works, which were a kind of Ulysses, the journey. And I had, when I talk about lines, I'd been looking at the reliefs, the Babylonian reliefs in the British Museum of the Lion Hunt. I'd been making drawings of them for many, many years. And I'm still not exactly sure what they symbolize for me, the wounded lion. But it was also this notion of the journey. The journey, I mean, and a lot of people who know my work will say, well, there's always a journey. It's a chariot or a boat or a horse. It's that notion of the journey. Remembering actually making the sugar lifts, I mean, it was an exciting process. I haven't really continued in the way that William has, using that. I mean, it was an easy way to do a plate with 3 colours on if you separate it. My work is normally more diving into the plate and stitching and scratching and doing stuff. So, yeah, I don't know whether I've got more to say on these 3 than that. Yeah.
So there we go. So that's another one of the states. Quite random mark making for you, because lots of white areas. And so because these were effectively test plates in a way for you, maybe you didn't have time for them to be resolved because of such a new process, and working in colour and paper might have been new for you as well then.
Yeah, it was, and I look at them now and I really like them. There's something kind of quite musical and delicate about them, and the fact that I could use the same figure on different plates with different interactions. Yeah, I like them.
Okay, and that's the other one from that series. So this is a very important work you've indicated. We're jumping a bit in terms of dates. It was 2010, and it was done at our workshop. The workshop opened in July 2002, unexpectedly. I mean, I opened a print workshop without a printer, and I'm not a printer. So I was lucky to find some people. In fact, I think even with your plates that we did as first plates, Morris Payne, when he left, didn't edition them. So we had these copper plates, and we had to edition, and I was one of the printers putting them on. But tell us more about why this work you find so consequential.
I'm trying to remember. I had remembered that Phil had taught me how to do spit bite, but maybe I'm wrong. I still remember a spit bite is where you actually use spit. How do you describe the process? I mean, if that spit and the acid, then you paint on with that. The spit is kind of holds it in a viscosity, which sort of stops the acid from moving. So you'll put an aqua tint, which is like a fine resin dust or something over the plate, and slightly heat it up to adhere to the plate, and then you paint with acid on it. And there was something about the process of the gentleness and the wateriness of it. And I was interested, the ocean is becoming the fish and the fish is becoming the ocean. There was something about playing with the metal and the wateriness and the playing of things together. Yeah, so it's just one of my favorite prints, and it's quite a large piece. Yeah.
So the journey, you refer to journey, sort of maybe that's a theme that runs through all your works, or was it a seminal in some way, besides the fact you were using a new process that you haven't used before?
I don't know how to actually describe why I love it so much. I mean, there's the wateriness, but it's also about the becoming, and maybe not the going. you know, the journey is getting somewhere. And I mean, maybe that notion of, you know, the fish becoming the ocean becoming the fish, that kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of has a spiritual meaning for me.
Just as an aside, you know, artists often are asked to talk about their work. How comfortable are you talking generally about the content of your work besides the additions?
I'm a lot more confident. 20 years ago, I was terrified to talk about what people would call my woo-woo beliefs. But maybe more people are, you know, interested in those things than they were.
Well, this is a rare opportunity for an artist speaking totally first-hand, very openly about collaborations. Because collaborations in a workshop are quite frightening, because an artist has to come and work in a space which is not their studio. It's now a printer, there's a publisher, and the workshop that we happen to now have is always open. We always welcome to have anybody walk in and sort of see it. A lot of artists found that quite daunting. But that's an aside again. So to carry on, this was a monotype, and I think this is a unique monotype again, is a painting, but it's a painting that's done on a perspex surface, and it gets covered with paper, it goes through a press. Sorry, this is reverberating, but it goes through a press. So it's effectively a painting, but it's a painting that's been flattened, and it happens to be on paper. So it tends to confuse people and often get called a print, but it's not really a print. It's a painting on a piece of paper that's gone through a press, which has flattened all the inks and created a texture that can't be created in any other way. You recall this one? Was there one you want to talk about?
Yeah, I did a series of what I called, well, I think I also did some lithographs at one point and some drawings. But the notion of the museum, I was seeing the museum almost as the brain, you know, the kind of accretion of things we know in history. And so I was almost like, I don't know how to describe it, because it worked as a visual sort of metaphor for me rather than a descriptive one. Because then that led me to look at the Velázquez Las Meninas, to also see the studio as the inner brain. So, I mean, you know, the museum is what's come before you. And then the studio is the blank canvas and starting from scratch. So I still haven't quite worked out what they mean for me in terms of a logical, sequential, being able to explain it. But like, where is thought coming from? And if we look later on at the Reveal series, you know, there's the doorway and the light, and I'll talk about those later, but it had something to do with the brain and how one gets inspiration, or where thought comes from, or the frontal lobe, whatever you want to call it. It might sound very esoteric, and maybe it is, but I don't know how to explain it otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we thought we'd do something different in that it's quite intense information. So if anybody has any questions, we're really happy to. We'd love them to ask. There's a lot of technical things about spit bite and lift ground and sugar lift. But anybody at this stage want some expansion or elaboration on what we've been talking about? Don't be shy. We should be explaining things very well. Sorry about that. I know, I must be a heavy breather or something, because I keep reverberating. And I'm not nervous, really. So this is another project where things, as our workshop became more confident, and I had young printers who I trained, including a young girl called Jill Ross, who just arrived out of the blue from Canada. And we were suddenly working with one of the great living printmakers, William Kentridge, and you're not far behind either. We decided to explore complex multi-plate prints, and also the colour of gold. And a chap called Phil Sanders, who, after Jack Sheriff, is my second most important mentor, and in fact continues to be a great friend and our main connection in America. And so, Deborah, I think there was a theme around horses that you said was applying at that stage. And one of the issues, sorry, just to take a little bit, about a workshop is that an artist can actually take a plate and make variations, make changes and all that before they finally arrive at an image that they would like to edition. And that has a French name called a bon à tirer, okay to print. So you'll see quite a few variations. And these works ended up being editioned at a workshop called Robert Blackburn Workshop, where Phil Sanders was a director. And Robert Blackburn, it's interesting about Robert Blackburn, he was an African American who served in the war, and when he came out, they were all entitled to study, and he went and studied art and ended up then setting up a print workshop. This is about the late 40s. So I think so these plates were created while Phil Sanders was here. They went to New York, to Blackburn. You went to Blackburn. We had a lovely Korean woman who then editioned it. So anything you want to talk about in terms of the content?
Yeah, I think it's easier for me to talk about the content because, it's the image of the horse and rider. I'm trying to think these came after a series of paintings I made when I was still exhibiting at Goodman, which were called Journey Home. And they had been influenced. I had done a project with Robert Hodgins and William at Art Miami Basel, where we had an animated movie we had made called Memo, and we had built the set of it and sort of shown the film in Art Basel, and it was bought by a collector in Switzerland. And it was my job to go and install it. And she had an amazing collection of Chinese ceramics, of the polo players and the little figures on the horses, which just blew my mind. And I did lots of sketches from them, and then they became the basis for a series of work. But I mean, I didn't have them on the ground. I had them kind of, floating in indeterminate space. And so I had done the paintings, and then I decided to use that as the subject to do these.
So how often would the imagery arrive before you made the paintings? So many artists used to come and develop their ideas in a print workshop, and then they were able to do all sorts of colour variations or mark variations, and then would go back to their painting studios and paint. Was your relationships painting?
I did the paintings first.
Okay, all right, good.
I'm not someone who thinks much when I work.
Sorry?
I don't think much when I work, I just do. As I say, if someone asks me to explain what my thought process is, then I don't know how to do anymore.
But even when you did your early paintings, did you used to do preparations, or were you just spontaneously?
I'm just remembering how I started those early paintings. I was making some prints with Jill, and I can't remember what they were. And some gold paint had got splashed onto paper, and she was worried that it was acidic and the paper might be destroyed, so she gave me all the paper. So I had these sort of nice sheets of, I can't remember what paper it was, with splashes on it, and then I started doing the horses on that, and that became the big works that I did for that show that I had at Goodman. They were paper that she was worried about. I didn't care about the acidity of the paper. I just used it to make art.
But a lot of your works are on paper. I mean,
yes.
Your drawings, there's some examples here. In fact,
I'm trying to remember if they were on paper before that, or was just because I got given these wonderful big sheets of paper with bits of. Maybe that's when I started splashing paint, because they were on the paper already. I can't remember.
Well, but I'm addicted to paper, so we just, our life is full of artists who work on paper.
Because my early works were oil on canvas more than paper.
Really, that's what I was thinking, but you didn't.
I'll have to go back and look and see.
So this all arose really by going with William and Robert to Caversham, where you were drawing on paper a lot before then, but now you would do editions as well.
I've remembered why I changed. I had babies and I had to breastfeed, and I get very dirty, as you know, when I make art, and having oil paint all over me and breastfeeding didn't work. Yeah. So I moved to thin washes of acrylic and watercolor and drawing.
So that's a bit of, there's a definitive explanation of
Absolutely.
this. It's very hard to be definitive about what an artist does, because the works themselves should talk for themselves.
Yeah.
So then let's talk about Fury, which I love, and I'm never quite sure why. It's got handwork on it. Do you remember this particular work in any great detail?
I do. Is there a title? Yeah, it's called Fury.
Fury.
You know, I mean, obviously I've been working with the lion, and then I was sort of looking at the Egyptian Sekhmet, you know, the lion goddess. And I've always been someone who loves going to museums. If I go traveling, I'm more interested in museums than contemporary art galleries. Because I don't know, I relate to art that's meant to be a power object. I mean, artists make art for different reasons. You know, mine is kind of that art, the power object of art can alter reality, even so slightly, and even if it's only a personal reality. And so I remember I was in Paris for a couple of months. I was at the Cité. I'd won some kind of residency there. And we got free passes. And I used to go to the Louvre before they smartened it up. And I loved just going to the basements where no one else went and just looking at these objects. So I was interested in ancient art. I was interested in fragmented bits of history. I don't know whether there's much more I want to say on that. Yeah.
So I think this might have been 2 plates, but I can't remember. There is a situation, it's never necessarily 1 copper plate, it could be 2, and you'll see an example, a very large work over there, which is 2 plates which are printed separately and then combined. Sorry, I do wander around a bit, so I hope it's able to. So this is Harmonia, which is a plate that I found in our studio. It had never been editioned, and it was also a square format, which was quite unusual for you. And then you did, and so you did a variation with it. You added sheen, collé, or you drew further on the Chinese paper, transparent paper, and you added that figure. Is that right? That's in the middle of the study.
Yeah. And looking back at that, I seem to remember I started that plate the same time as the ocean's becoming the fish becoming the ocean. It was the first time I'd used spit bite.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have to recall whether Phil was there or who it was who was teaching that, and then disappeared, and then it sat around for a long time, and then I went and found some imagery and brought it out from that a couple of years later.
I just found when I saw it, it's such a powerful image, and I don't know. You see it as a powerful image. It's sort of as if there's someone speaking. There's all sorts of that very amorphous face down on the left side of the picture, which is nondescript. That's quite an unusual mark for you. I don't remember actually. When I look at this now, I'm seeing things all the time. I mean, this is the wonders of being in this world, it's all about visual literacy. That's how I fell in love with what I do, because it's, you look but you don't really see. But when you have an artist working on a press and different pressures, and the printmakers who are here doing different inking, these things vary.
Yeah.
Was this potent?
I mean, it's hard. As I say, I often only know what my work means many years later. I don't always know what I'm doing at the time. But, I mean, the idea, the original concept would have been around about the same time as us doing the museum pieces, as doing that, working with the notion of inside the head and the brain. But this one was more about sort of alchemy and the harmonia. I mean, that's an alembic. The white thing is an alchemical alembic, which was the vessel in which alchemy takes place. So I was still playing with that conscious, unconscious other, and maybe the work sort of suggests that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd just like to ask about the glyphs that you use. In most of those images, there are glyphs in the bottom right-hand corner. And I just wondered the significance of that. Is it an alchemical thing for you even if you go back to some of the other images, it's quite clear that it's something that you use.
Yeah, it is, but I maybe relate to them more poetically, visually than direct meaning. I know that I used to use a thing, a sort of M, which was like a cross, which stands for the self. And then I've used the shape of the alembic and quite a few things. So, yeah, it's not as if I have a dictionary and decide I'm going to do this and do that. So they just arise sometimes. I'm not always sure why.
Thanks for the question. This again, so now we're entering that period, I think, where you started working in series a lot more and different shapes. I'm not sure, again, if this is part of the series, but then came this particular series, Annunciation, which consisted of 3. This idea then of working in series, did that develop because you just had the freedom of the gallery and the printers to be allowing you to develop series? Because I think works in series are so much about what work should be.
I think I do that in painting as well. I can work on 20 works at a time. I don't do one painting at a time or one drawing at a time. And often I will work on about 3 or 4 works of the same proportions, just to have a conversation between them. I'm not sure whether I made the decision before I started or if I did one. When we look at the reveal ones, I certainly did one and then decided to do the next 2. We're going to look at this later. But looking at these, they predate the reveal series, which you're going to look at, but they're still influenced by my experience of looking at Las Meninas, the Velázquez painting. And I had done an etching a long, long time ago at Malcolm Christian Caversham. And it was, well, you never know who you are, and it's been hanging in my house for a long time. And oddly enough, William came to visit one weekend, and he said, oh, you should really look at that. And I happened to be in Barcelona about 2 months later, so I didn't get to go and see the original in the Prado. I was only in Barcelona, but I went to the Picasso Museum, and I was looking at Picasso's rendering of Las Meninas. And I did used to have little notebooks, and I'd do sketches of things. And I did a quick sketch of Picasso, and the figure in the doorway became an angel in the doorway. Not intentionally, just I drew it very quickly, and the coat became wings. And it was only when I came back to South Africa, I looked at it and I thought, ah, that's an angel in the doorway. And it started, I did some paintings, and so these were influenced by it. Even this first one, I mean, in Picasso's rendering, he has a window pretty much like that in one of the Picasso ones. So I was working through on those things. Yeah.
Okay. And this is now, these were then, I can't quite recall, mirrors and this particular pair.
Yeah, they also kind of grew out of having been in Spain. And I can't remember where I was looking at some kind of like crucifix figures, and I did some drawings, and again, was it Phil? I think it was Phil. He said, why don't we, instead of having them, black on white, we do the opposite. So we experimented with doing reverse, of making the drawn lines the negative, or the white and the dark, So we were playing around with seeing what happens, and I called them mirror matter for that reason, that they weren't what I'd drawn, but we did the opposite. I kept on thinking of, what was that Orpheus, the Orpheus movie, what was it, where they go through the mirror and it becomes the instead of the positive image, everything gets reversed, so it's like a photographic negative. So I was quite interested in that.
So also, one of the great things about your work is the amount of effort you put into making marks on a copper plate. Because for an etching to be printed, you start off with a clean sheet of copper, and it's the marks that are made, which then retain the image once the plate has been inked up and then wiped. But you had a box of tools which used to come with, and you love black, and you also great memories of you having black all over your face as well. But So that intense black, I think this was a mezzotint, if I remember correctly, or maybe I'm wrong, but maybe we'll find. That's another technical process. These processes all seem to be in French because it was the sort of the printing, from my knowledge, image printing really happened in France in the mid-1800s with lithography, and then it developed, and then with artists like Picasso and Chagall and people like that, there were a lot of great print workshops in Paris and France, and lithography process was actually created also. So the things like Bonatire, mezzotint à la poupée, which is one I love, which is where the artist will come and make individual marks on the copper plate, which are not in the plate, and therefore they change. I think maybe your à la poupée was maybe more on the sheen, which was collaged. Is that right? Or am I wrong?
So which one's on the sheet?
I'm just trying to remember, just randomly.
I can't actually remember the process. Phil kind of had this idea of how to make it something else, and of course I was working another plate while he did all of that, because I'm not that involved in the technical stuff.
Right, yeah, I've got to get off the technique stuff. So this is a very important big work that you did with Phil Sanders, who, as I say, is a master printer, who was a man who actually came out 6 times from America, and if it wouldn't have been for him, we wouldn't have had a working workshop. And he wanted to do very large plates, and it was quite a learning curve for our team. The team was headed by Julian Ross, who worked with me for 17 years, but now went back to our home in Saskatoon. So there's a great print workshop now in Saskatoon, and with someone who's connecting very much with South African artists. So the Parsifal existed in different states, but we just show the final state. Do you want to talk about the horses there again? I've always been fascinated by the figures in the background. Is that a crowd behind the horse, or what is it?
I mean, I'm remembering now that Phil came to my studio before I went. He wanted to come and see how I made my paintings, and I was working on a painting and a similar thing, and with the layers. And he said, let's go and see if we can make that work as a print. So he was getting me again to do, the aquatint, the spit bite, and whatever in different. So they're 3 plates or 2?
3 plates again.
There are 3 plates on that. So he was interested in saying, well, okay, you paint in this way. Let's see if we can make prints in this way. So I had been working on a figure and a horse with a suggestion of people behind. I don't think I'd call that one Parsifal, but I was interested in the Fisher King, and I was reading things on Parsifal, so it became Parsifal.
So this is a big work, and it's a lot of the works we're now talking about are hanging on the wall, and Strauss has been very kind to join in this whole celebration of Deborah being here. 25 years of our sort of printmaking collaboration, and so again coming back to me, this is a really wonderful celebration. And thanks to the other addicted print person, Wilhelm von Rensburg, who we love recounting or sharing our knowledge. This again, this is something you may want to talk more about. It's Velasquez. A series of 3 works that you created.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to me looking at Picasso doing Velasquez. I mean, I did get to the Prado the next time I went, but I had seen it when I was in my 20s. But yeah, it was to do more with my sketchbooks, because I'd drawn so suddenly that kind of like one of the Las Meninas, one of the maids, was offering, in the originals, offering a cup to the Infanta. And I drew it so quickly that her hand wasn't holding the cup, and I kind of became interested in that notion of that relationship and what the Infanta, what is the Infanta? And I still don't know, but she became, the relationship is between the 2 figures in the front in a way. And the kind of, I'm trying to remember the image. whether there's a flying cup in that one or not. But it was about that sense of recognition between the two figures in the front. And then again, the angel in the doorway, and then the Picasso windows on the side. I don't always have a story as why I'm doing something. It's just what appears. And in that one, I think the cup becomes an alchemical alembic that is floating in the air. And it's still about the relationship between the figures. It's sort of an act of recognition, like there you are in a way. I don't know how to explain it otherwise. And yeah, the original print that I'd made, that William had commented on and said you should relook at that, where I'd originally looked at Las Meninas, gosh, in the 80s already. There was a figure coming down, almost like a figure of inspiration. And I did a number of oil paintings around this idea at the same time as making these prints, which was kind of where's inspiration. One of my oil paintings is called By What Light Do We Really See? And it was about what is inspiration, what is the brain, what is the flash of inspiration, what is the doorway, what is the figure in the doorway? I was sort of, it's not logical, it's poetic.
This is one of my favorites again. I think it's again this intense meta tint or something, and somehow how this little face emerges. And this you must have spent quite a bit of time on this plate, because you did all this work yourself. Your roulette, which is
my hands get ruined. Doing that in sculpture, my hands get ruined.
That's right. Do you remember making this print?
Yes, I do. I wanted to get that sense of, being aware, that sort of sense of a kind of a knowingness that floods through you, or presence.
Okay, well, let's keep moving. This was, in fact, what's fun here is the printer, Kim Lee, is sitting, who was involved in this particular work, which is when Phil Sanders came out. And I think it was a two-plater, and the challenge was also the gold and trying to get the colours, get that, just somehow to get things stick. I mean, I could ask Kim to explain it if she wants, but anyway. Do you want to talk more about that?
It was, I don't know if it was again with Phil saying, well, let's take a painting and see if you can make a print based on a painting.
Okay, so that was good.
It comes from a painting that I'd made, yeah.
And then this was done at the same time.
Yeah, this is it called Frail Crown, because I then did a big painting of it. I'd been watching some series on Netflix, I think it was Vikings or something, and there was a thing where there was a king sitting, an English king sitting on a particular throne. And I don't know, this drawing, I started this drawing with something else, I think it was a standing figure initially. Often what I start and what it becomes are very different things. And I like that notion of this frail throne, frail crown. That it's got very spindly little legs, not going to hold you up for that much longer. So, yeah, that's what it is.
Did I skip over the high heel shoes for the Annunciation? Is that right?
Yeah, we went back into the Annunciation.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you mentioned.
We're going back, yeah. Those ones, they haven't all got high heels. Yes, there is a high heel shoe. One's got high heel shoes and she doesn't, I don't think. Or is there? I can't remember. The other one, and then the next one maybe? Yeah, there's a little high heel shoe there. Yeah, I did a series of works actually starting from an animation I did with William and Robert, where there was this woman in these red high heels lifting up and down, and kind of over the years I used the red high heels a lot, and it was kind of like wanting to have the physical sensual. So you've got the angel of the doorway, it's called Annunciation, and she's not quite sure. She still enjoys her high heel shoes. She's sitting, and if you go back to some of them, are just sometimes sitting and sort of looking, and then some of them's looking back and looking, like that one especially, the second one. It's kind of like, yeah, there's the angel, and there's the line, but you know. Am I ready for this, or do I want to enjoy a little bit more of the carnal life? I don't know. You know, it was that sense of it. Yeah.
These are just on our brief conversation beforehand, these are a few things you pointed out, you know, which are sort of quite new and fun to talk about. This is quite fabulous. So this is a great print we have, where we have the 3 plates which existed to arrive at this particular stage. Yeah, I think you did transfers. Actually, it was a 1 plate actually, but you kept changing. You know?
Yeah, no, it started off being called sacrifice, where the woman was sacrificing, was it a sheep or a goat? And then there was a man behind her with a knife to her neck. And it became this. It became Embody Me, but I cut the plate down a bit, and I had to do a lot of scratching and scraping away to get rid of the figure behind and the darkness. So it was more about Embody Me, kind of revealing the line being, I guess, in a way. But yeah, the you know, I'm so glad you did some prints of the early ones, because it's really interesting to see how things evolve.
It's something we have on the wall at the gallery at the Blue House. It's the 3 states arriving at that. And you can look, and at the final stage, you still have the memories or the history of the plate, which isn't totally obliterated. So this is again, I think this is a wonderful series of 6 sketches. I recall, but these are small works, and I just think they're absolutely wonderful. You'll see 4 of the 6 on the walls, and sketches being done on copper instead of in your sketchbook, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I made them at the time we were doing the she-wolf, which required a lot of technical stuff I wasn't involved with.
Could I just stop just to show everybody the sea-wolf, which you'll see there? That's it over there. It's about 2.5 meters across. So let me just get back. This was light relief while you were working on that.
I mean, you know, I'd grab any offcuts of plates I could find in the studio, because I can't sit and wait while stuff happens. And I had my sketchbooks with me, and I just chose a page out of my sketchbook and did a really quick dry point on the sketchbooks.
How that comes about is that these copper plates have to be, if they have to be etched, it takes time. It's again, I won't go into detail. So it's one of the nice things, artists will have time waiting for something to dry and something to be bitten by acid. And then randomly they find a small copper plate and keep going, which creates wonderful series.
Yeah.
Also, it's spontaneous, which is so nice, which we like so much. We love working with you, but hopefully one day we'll be able to do that again.
Yeah.
And that is quite an extraordinary image of yours. That was done separately, I think, wasn't it?
It was done at the same time, but it wasn't necessarily a sketchbook one. It's a bigger piece, is it? You're in a little sketch. Well, the sketchbook ones were just whatever plates were lying around. They weren't particular.
Do you want to maybe explain what's it, chiaroscuro or whatever, how you get this amazing effect?
Oh, I haven't got my glasses.
No.
Maybe I should look behind me. No, they would have been using roulettes.
Mm-hmm.
Roulettes are kind of like a little roller with little pits on them that they put the surface of the plate. So it's almost like an aquatint dark, but it's a mechanical way of rolling. And then I might kind of burnish away some of the shadow with a sort of smooth burnisher. To kind of
but the sensation of light, I mean, that's quite extraordinary, the way those areas you left blank. And
well, you know me, I kind of often want my plates not to look squeaky clean, and I used to put them in the back of my bucky and drive home and get them all scratched and dirty. And then I would have burnished and cleaned up to get the light, you know, and polished the areas I wanted to be light on a dirty plate.
Is that sort of reclining nude figure something that's recurring, or what's the significance of it in your work, or is it not of any significance?
It was just something that happened at that particular time, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, see, this was the piece de resistance, and there's a book on it relating to that body of work. I mean, it's been very fortuitous in being, in my days of being a book publisher, we could do books around the artists we worked with. So first one was basically on William, and then books on yourself, on small books, and also on Diane Victor, a few others. But this was, that I think Phil came out specifically warning you he wanted you to do something really big. Is that right? Or am I just saying?
He did, and I thought we were going to do like the Parsifal, a overlaying of plates. And he said, well, I started drawing the figures on the one plate and then the dog on the other. And he said, well, rather than doing an overlay, let's put them next to each other. And I put them next to each other, and then for some reason I just went like this and made the cave. I hadn't thought of doing a cave. It was a way of visually combining the two. And then it became she-wolf, with the howling dog, and then the other dog sort of out in the area. So, as I said, I don't think.
Oh, and that's in the two plates overlaid.
Yeah, so then we decided to try, because we were going to do an overlay print, what happened if we overlaid it? So that's deep, deep into the ground. It's not, it's deep, deep in the cave.
And that sort of white little horse down in the bottom right, just something that...
Do you see it as a horse or a dog? Or a she-wolf? Yeah.
Desire to keep defining things, which is silly.
Yeah.
So this is again, I think this may be the end, if I'm not mistaken. Wilhelm? Oh, good. That's not good for, I'm sure everybody's getting a bit tired sitting and listening, so it's a good moment.
Yeah.
But now we can have questions as well. But this is also such a uniquely minimal, beautiful object, full of movement. It's Deborah's plates are very messy. The edges are got ink on them. There's scratches on them. To the sort of the print that I love. They're not meant to be perfect. They just can vary. They're spontaneous, and that's where I was fortunate in the beginning of my career, working with Joe Tilson, the artist who put pins into his works and stuck things on them, broke all the rules of what an edition used to be, which edition used to be that everyone had to be exactly the same.
Yeah, what I love about dry point etching is the physicality of it. The fact that it's a thing and it's metal and I scratch and it's not, I don't do it just for the image that comes out. There's something, as I said, Phil was the one who said I make prints like a sculptor, where I always thought I made sculptures like a painting, because I don't sort of plan what I'm going to do in a sculpture. I don't make a little kind of model to work from. I kind of work like a painter. I'll just do it, and cut away and redo it and do this. So it was interesting that Phil Saunders wrote about me making paintings and prints like a sculptor. And I'm beginning to understand what he means. Mm-hmm. There is something about that plate. There is something about the physicality of it and the tools. But yeah, again, those would have been two images in my mini notebooks, which I can't find. I spent trying to sort out my studio. I don't know where they are, all my notebooks. But for many years, when I was traveling in museums and that, I would just be doing little sketches and little sketches.
Yeah, shame with
all of those, yeah. So they were my starting points for a lot of my etchings, yeah.
Well, this is just a small, I suppose, it's a small number of the prints, or the number of smaller prints. There's some very, very large works of Deborah's which were done at Jack, which are huge, and some of them became paintings. They're sort of 6, 7, 8 foot high,
the Bride Striped,
your Bride Striped.
And the Courage, the Courage.
So there's a hell of a lot more to what Deborah's about in terms of images she's created on paper. But anybody wanting to ask any questions?
We have a roving mic, and I was just thinking that maybe the last words we can make it Mark 2. Gerald's time. But I have the microphone. If there are any questions, just put up your hand, We can all hear you. Oh.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't be asking one because it's a bit like being at home asking, eating all the food before the guests. Deborah, maybe it just struck me because you've been traveling, but journey, I mean, I'm fascinated by the journey and the spiritual journey that I've seen in your work, and you referenced it. But now that you live in different hemispheres, or not the same hemisphere, but different parts of the world, has it exacerbated the journey? What has it been like to come home? Or is it not home now? I don't know, that's maybe as South Africans we always feel that travel or the journey of life is such a part of our journeys. I don't know, I'm not really explaining myself, but it's coming out in how you've been speaking tonight that it's really relevant.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't plan to journey. I left in 2 weeks with a suitcase and a daughter, prepared to leave everything behind in the beginning of COVID in 2020. And but on the journey there, I went to New Zealand with the aim of getting to Australia where my brother and my son live. But I have a New Zealand passport. My mother was from New Zealand. And it sort of became like this is my motherland, but I've got to go to the land of my mother. It's almost like I'm needing to marry the two. And whilst it's been a journey going there, and it's a very different life, it's very watery. I live on a little island off Auckland, so an island off an island on the edge of the world, and that's what it feels like. And it's a very gentle place. But I need both. I didn't come back for 4 years, 3.5 years, and I realized that they're very different lives, and I'm a different person in each. And by combining the two, or marrying the two, I feel I've come home to myself in a way I can't explain. So, yeah.
Any other questions? In front.
So it's a feature of your work for me that you open spaces between the figures and leave the spaces empty to create almost like contested spaces between the figures. And I wondered how intentional that was.
I think I'm going to have to think on that one. I'm not. Yeah.
Anywhere else? Any other? Over there.
Firstly, thank you so much for opening up on your process and how you are as an artist. It's really been insightful, and I've been collecting your work and never seen you, so this is really special for me. Thank you. We can give her a round of applause. I enjoyed how your pieces are made in the moment. It's very, as you said, poetic. I'm interpreting it as spiritual, and it's a nice dimension to connect you to something bigger. But now I'm interested because all of that is, number one, existing in an artwork, and what I'm really interested is your views on and how it makes you feel that sits on a wall in front of my dinner table when I have dinner every night. Just how that makes you feel.
It terrifies me. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of it's hard. I mean, they come out of me, but if I have too much of my own work around, I don't like it. So I'm very glad other people do. The process of making is what's important for me. The journey is in making the work for me.
Right. Any more questions? Okay. Or otherwise, a big thank you. Over there.
Maybe I'll just speak in a loud voice. I just wanted to ask you about your work you've been making while you've been in New Zealand. Tell us about it.
The work that you're making in New Zealand, that's a question.
I did have a show at the beginning of last year at Everard Reed with some of the new works. And they are more gentle, more feminine. You know, I kind of maybe miss although then I come back here and I'm a different person, you know. As I said, I used to be terrified of coming back and thinking I'd catch an Uber from ORT, and I hire a car and I zoom off and I see my city and I dodge the trucks and the potholes, and I love it. I feel alive. I don't know whether I want to do it full time, but yeah, my life is much gentler there, and I think the works that I make there are more gentle and maybe more feminine. The part of New Zealand I live in is very feminine. It's gentle and calm waters and islands that aren't prisons, and you know, sort of a different sense of landscape, and trees that overhang the sea, you know, and rocks and cliffs. It's a very different feeling, yeah, and I love both. Yeah.
I just want to say what a privilege it's been to work with you and to have you here.
Well,
and really, you know, you're someone we admire so much. You're a true artist who makes art because you need to make art, and an audience finds what you make very appealing, and I think you're a very important art person or part of art history in South Africa, and your connections with other artists of your period like William and Robert are very important. So again, thanks for picking up on this conversation, and thanks to everybody. Thanks very much to Strauss, always been so supportive of works on paper and prints. So thank you to everybody for being here.
And David, I want to say thank you, and obviously thanks Strauss as well, but thank you for, you know, taking me on the journey, taking me to Jack Sharif, bringing Full out, creating your workshops. I would never have carried on etching. You know, going down to Caversham when I had small kids didn't work anymore. You know, and I thank you for the journey, and, you know, I would never have made this work without you. And I'm very, very grateful.
Great. Let's switch that off.
Do we just... Was it not too?
Um,